The air in the Europaplatz sector of Germania, formerly Berlin, was crisp and clean, filtered by massive, automated systems humming beneath the broad avenues. Towering buildings of granite and steel, designed with a brutalist grandeur echoing classical forms but scaled to immense, intimidating proportions, dominated the skyline. Statues of stern-faced leaders, idealized Aryan figures, and triumphant eagles stood sentinel over vast, empty parade grounds designed for mass spectacle, where synchronized formations of troops or youth groups occasionally performed chillingly precise drills to the sound of martial music broadcast from hidden speakers. Order was absolute, meticulously enforced and visibly omnipresent in the precise, almost programmed movements of automated transport vehicles navigating dedicated lanes, the rigid, emotionless posture of patrolling soldiers from various elite formations in updated gray and black uniforms, and the sparse, carefully controlled flow of approved citizens on the wide, sterile thoroughfares. Even public sounds were curated, filtered, muted, replaced by state-sanctioned broadcasts or the low hum of machinery, a stark contrast to the cacophony of free cities elsewhere. It was September 2025, 80 years since the architects of this rigid order had begun to reshape the world in their image. The world hadn't always been this way. Its present grim reality was forged in a different fire than the one known in some other histories. The hinge point wasn't a single explosion or a specific battle's outcome in isolation, but a series of brutal, successful adaptations and relentless strategic drives during the Second World War. The crucial divergence, in 1940, Operation Sea Lion, the planned German invasion of Britain, wasn't abandoned after the initial setbacks of the Battle of Britain. Instead, after a costly and desperate prolonged air campaign that wore down fighter command's resources and morale, and a daring, highly risky naval gamble that temporarily disrupted the Royal Navy's dominance in home waters through a series of dispersed attacks and diversions, the Wehrmacht achieved a foothold on the English coast in late 1940. The subsequent battles were horrific, a grinding struggle fought across the fields and towns of southern England. This, coupled with a sustained, brutal strategic bombing campaign targeting industrial capacity and transport hubs, while deliberately avoiding total destruction of major cities initially, a cold calculation to preserve future assets, fractured British resistance. Facing inevitable collapse, the British government was forced into a humiliating armistice in early 1941. A collaborationist puppet government was installed, key military assets neutralized or absorbed, and Britain became Reichskommissariat Britannia, ruled with uncompromising severity from London. With Britain neutralized and its resources and strategic location now serving the Reich, the United States, while profoundly hostile and covertly supporting burgeoning resistance movements across Europe, lacked a direct, viable staging ground for a major counter-invasion across the Atlantic. This seismic shift allowed Germany to commit its full, terrifying military might, including forces originally earmarked for Sea Lion, to the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, Operation Barbarossa, albeit with improved logistics and a more focused strategic approach honed by the challenges in Britain. The war in the East became an even more protracted, unimaginably brutal meat grinder than in our timeline. While total conquest of the vast Soviet territories and the complete annihilation of Soviet forces proved impossible even for the Wehrmacht, by the late 1940s, after years of unprecedented bloodshed, strategic breakthroughs on key fronts, and the slow, agonizing collapse of Soviet infrastructure and manpower reserves under relentless pressure, the Soviet state fractured and essentially ceased to exist as a unified entity. Its western heartland, stretching deep into what was once European Russia, was occupied, divided into vast Reichskommissariaten, and administered as a brutal colonial space for resource extraction and demographic re-engineering, leaving only a fragmented, weakened rump state clinging to existence beyond the Ural Mountains, locked in perpetual, low-level conflict with the Reich's eastern legions. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the war between the United States and the Japanese Empire raged for years with an intensity mirroring the European conflict. It was a bloody, island-hopping contest across immense oceanic distances. Neither side achieved the decisive naval victory that characterized our timeline's war. Naval technologies, carrier warfare, and amphibious capabilities evolved in parallel, leading to a costly stalemate. Japan consolidated its control over a vast, Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, encompassing coastal China, leaving an inland, fragmented resistance, Korea, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and countless strategic Pacific islands, ruthlessly exploiting their resources. The war ended in the early 1950s not with the shock of nuclear devastation, perhaps their development timelines were slightly delayed, or the political will for such total, reciprocal annihilation was less clear-cut when facing two such vast, resilient foes simultaneously, but through a tense, uneasy armistice, brokered by the few remaining neutral powers, that essentially froze the territorial lines, acknowledging the immense cost and futility of further direct warfare. The result, a world permanently divided into three primary, ideologically opposed power blocks. The Greater Germanic Reich, a chilling edifice of racial purity and absolute control, stood triumphant in Europe and North Africa, ruled from its gargantuan, redesigned capital, Germania, formerly Berlin. Its authority was absolute, enforced by a labyrinthine network of security services, SS, Gestapo, SD, and built upon the systematic oppression, enslavement, and mass murder of all populations deemed undesirable or racially inferior. Order was its chilling mantra, reflected not just in the monumental, sterile architecture and the rigid control over public space, but in the meticulous rationing of resources, the state-controlled allocation of labor, often forced, the complete suppression of independent thought, and the chillingly curated public sphere where even sounds were filtered, muted, or replaced by state-sanctioned broadcasts. Life for the racially favored citizens within the core territories meant relative prosperity and security, but also constant surveillance and ideological conformity. The Japanese Empire reigned supreme in East Asia and the Pacific, a fiercely nationalistic, militaristic power controlling a vast sphere of influence through pragmatic control and suppression of local identities in favor of imperial Japanese culture, driven by the needs of the home islands and powerful industrial combines. While lacking the overt, pseudoscientific extermination ideology of the Reich, its rule over conquered territories was often equally brutal, focused on resource extraction and maintaining control through military force and political purges. Their cities, while technologically advanced hubs of industry and control, often had a visually chaotic and densely populated energy that contrasted sharply with the Reich's cold precision. Traditional aesthetics were often blended with modern steel and glass, creating a unique urban landscape. And the United States, bruised but ideologically unbowed, held the Americas and maintained key strategic outposts like southern Iceland and pockets in the Pacific. Isolated from its traditional European allies and facing existential threats across two oceans, it had evolved into a more security-conscious, perpetually mobilized society. While retaining the outward forms of democratic institutions, civil liberties were significantly curtailed in the name of national security, with widespread surveillance, loyalty oaths, and a pervasive atmosphere of vigilance against both foreign agents and perceived internal threats. American culture was deeply shaped by the continuous external challenge, focusing on resilience, patriotic unity, a fierce, often idealized definition of liberty framed explicitly against the totalitarianism of the other two empires, and a simmering, generational resentment over the outcome of the war and the state of the world. The sense of being the last major bastion of freedom in a world dominated by oppressive empires defined the national psyche, fueling a powerful, often jingoistic, sense of purpose. The wind howled across the fortified border zone in Reykjavik, whipping snow and dust against the reinforced observation post windows. Inside, Sergeant Rodriguez, a third-generation serviceman whose grandfather had fought in the brutal Pacific campaign, peered through thermal optics at the opposing position a kilometer away. Concrete barriers, razor wire glinting even under the overcast sky, automated turrets scanning with unseen electronic eyes, the grim architecture of separation stretched as far as the eye could see, cutting the city, cutting the island, in two. On the other side, the flag of the Greater Germanic Reich, a black swastika on a red field in a white circle, snapped rigidly in the gale. Here, the stars and stripes stood just as defiantly against the gray expanse. This desolate frontier in 2025 was more than just a line on a map, it was a physical embodiment of the deep, unyielding schism that had defined global existence for 80 years, a constant, chilling reminder of a history that had unfolded very differently. Captain Johannes Brandt of the SS Grenztruppen, border troops, stood on a windswept observation platform overlooking the border zone from the Reich side. Below lay the desolate strip of concrete, concertina wire, automated sentry turrets, and minefields, a no-man's land of surveillance and death. On the other side stood the US observation post. Brandt was a product of the Reich system, disciplined, ideologically indoctrinated from birth. His dark gray uniform was immaculate, his posture ramrod straight, his gaze sharp and suspicious, constantly sweeping the opposing position and the empty zone between. He felt a fierce pride in the Reich's strength, the unwavering resolve it represented against a hostile world, but years on the lines had instilled a deep, visceral caution. A small, worn photograph of an Aryan-featured woman and 2 children was tucked deep inside his tunic, a rare, intensely private anchor in a life of rigid state service. His comlink buzzed, a sterile sound in the biting wind. "Captain, thermal sensors indicate unusual activity near checkpoint Gamma on the American side. Elevated heat signatures, non-standard pattern. Appears to be heavy equipment, and something else. A unique energy signature pulsing intermittently." Brandt's gaze sharpened, fixed on the distant American position. His gut tightened. This wasn't routine radar maintenance. This felt different. It resonated with some of the fragmented classified reports he'd seen, hinting at unusual energy research within the Reich itself, a program codenamed Odensfaust. Could the Americans have developed something similar? Or was this related to the strange energy fluctuations reported near some of the Reich's deep research sites in Eastern Europe? "Log every pulse, every frequency with maximum precision," he ordered, his voice low and intense. Alert Sector Command. Priority 1. Note the precise timing and duration of every pulse. We need full spectrum analysis and correlation. We need eyes on that location, now. He gripped the railing, the wind biting at his face, the Cold War suddenly feeling very hot indeed. Across the zone, in the American sector, Sergeant Rodriguez stared intently at his monitor. "Still getting that pulse, Lieutenant?" They finished dismantling the old radar dish fast. Now they're installing something else. Looks smaller on thermal, but the energy spikes are massive. Way too big for a standard dish. He glanced at Lieutenant Eva Rostova. "It's pointed right at us, sir." Eva Rostova ran a gloved hand through her close-cropped hair. Years on these bleak frontiers, watching the enemy, training for a war that never came but always threatened, had etched lines of weariness around her eyes. She was tired of the perpetual alert, the gray skies, the concrete barriers, the sheer waste of brilliant minds and resources locked in this stalemate. "Log every pulse, every frequency," she ordered, her voice tight. "Get the drone closer if you can do it without tripping their nets. I don't like this." She turned to Rodriguez, a flicker of something other than command in her eyes, shared cynicism, shared exhaustion. Probably just another propaganda dish, trying to beam their glorious broadcasts this far north. Rodriguez offered a small, humorless smile in return. "Yes, sir. Wouldn't want to miss the Reich Youth Choir." The tension between the Reich and the US, and indeed between all 3 powers, wasn't just military. It was deeply ideological and technological. The Reich's state-controlled economy was geared relentlessly towards self-sufficiency within its vast sphere and maximum military production, trading with outsiders only on its own terms, often exploiting resources and labor from subjugated territories with ruthless efficiency. The US maintained a more market-driven system, albeit one profoundly shaped and distorted by immense state defense contracts, trading with its remaining allies and, pragmatically but uneasily, with the Japanese Empire, a relationship often strained by ideological differences, economic competition, and lingering wartime animosities. Reports filtered back to Germania of unrest in occupied territories, whispers of partisan activity, resistance that the state media dismissed as the dying gasps of inferior peoples, fueled by foreign propaganda. But the security apparatus knew better. They never rested, constantly hunting for enemies within and without, their methods unseen, chillingly efficient. One such enemy, operating in the shadows of Reichskommissariat Britannia, was Dr. Alastair Finch. Before the war, he had been a brilliant young physicist at Oxford, full of hope for a future of scientific discovery. Now, in his late 70s, gaunt and weary but with a stubborn spark in his eyes, he worked under constant SS oversight in a heavily controlled research facility near what was once London. His motivation was simple and profound. They had taken everything: his country, his freedom, his university, his colleagues, his future, building their monstrous state on lies and murder. All he had left was his intellect and the burning conviction that the knowledge he possessed belonged to humanity, not to the monstrous ideology that sought to weaponize it. Working under constant SS oversight in a controlled research facility, ostensibly on advanced aerospace materials, he had detected subtle, anomalous energy fluctuations in the Reich's continent-spanning power grid, faint, non-random patterns that his deeply ingrained pre-war physics intuition screamed were not mere engineering inefficiencies. He suspected they were the telltale energy signature of a new, highly secret project, something related to large-scale energy manipulation or even gravitational effects, a technology that could shatter the current military balance and grant the Reich an insurmountable advantage in the global standoff. Intelligence, gleaned through equally risky channels, hinted the Reich was nearing a critical testing phase for this system, codenamed Odensfaust within the highest echelons. Getting this information out, a warning of a potential shift in the global power balance, was a desperate race against time. His only viable contact in the outside world was Eamon, a fellow physicist who had fled to neutral Ireland years ago. Communication was limited to a dangerous, low-power burst transmission from a specific, exposed coastal location in occupied Cornwall, requiring a precarious setup of salvaged equipment and precise timing to slip past the Reich's ubiquitous surveillance. One stormy night, risking everything his long, cautious life had guarded, Finch traveled under a false permit to the designated coastal spot in remote Cornwall, accompanied by a trusted, equally daring contact from the local resistance remnant. The wind whipped around the ruins of an old lighthouse on the cliffs. Rain lashed down. He set up the bulky, disguised equipment, a suitcase containing salvaged components, wires, and a precisely calibrated emitter, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and grim determination. The transmission window was terrifyingly narrow, just minutes before the Reich's automated coastal surveillance systems, designed to detect U-boat communications, would pinpoint the anomalous energy signature. He uploaded his coded data, mathematical models describing the energy anomalies, hypothesized schematics of the device based on the limited data, and a stark warning about Odensfaust and its potential. He initiated the transmission, a silent burst of data containing the potential to alter the global Cold War. Back in the sterile, subterranean data analysis center in Germania, alarms flared with urgent efficiency. Anomaly confirmed, coastal sector Britannia West. Burst transmission detected, non-standard profile. Source triangulated, energy signature matches known patterns of clandestine activity. Captain Brandt reacted instantly, his earlier tension translating into sharp, decisive action. Dispatch rapid response units. Coastal Command. SS air patrols. Lock down the sector. Seal all exits. Find the source. Eliminate it. Leave nothing. His face was a mask of grim determination. This signal had to be stopped, its payload secured or destroyed, its source silenced. Source details? Personnel, he barked into the calm, even as units scrambled, sirens wailing remotely in the occupied territory. Unknown personnel, Captain. Mobile unit. Correlates with known patterns of hostile espionage or internal sabotage attempts, came the automated response. Initiating cross-reference with SS personnel logs in the sector. Suspect profile generating. Brandt didn't wait for the match. His hand instinctively went to the hidden photograph under his tunic. Protecting the Reich was protecting his family. Protecting the Reich's secrets was paramount. Alistair Finch never knew if his message reached its intended recipient. He and his contact were apprehended minutes after the transmission completed, the ruins around them swarming with SS troops, automated search drones, and armored vehicles. A small, defiant spark of intellectual courage extinguished in the relentless, brutal machinery of the Reich. But miles away, across the choppy, grey waters, in a cluttered workshop overlooking the harbor in Dublin, Eamon hunched over his jury-rig receiver, adjusting the dials frantically through the interference. The signal was weak, fragmented by the storm, distance, and intentional jamming, riddled with static. But it was there. He had pieces of the code, tantalizing hints of a new, dangerous Reich technology that transcended conventional understanding, an energy signature profile, fragments of mathematical models, a project code name. The information was incomplete, enigmatic, requiring painstaking analysis and cross-referencing with data from other sources, signals intercepted from Reich internal communications, whispers from other resistance contacts. But it was enough to confirm the threat was real and imminent. This fragment of knowledge, smuggled out at immense personal cost, would be analyzed, verified, and passed, through a complex and dangerous chain of contacts and cutouts, via sympathetic merchant marine captains, diplomatic pouches from the few neutral states, encrypted messages bounced off salvaged satellite fragments, eventually reaching American or Japanese intelligence agencies. The race was on, a silent, desperate contest to understand and counter the potential new threat before the Reich could perfect and deploy it, a race that might just alter the delicate, dangerous global balance. Back on the Iceland border, Sergeant Rodriguez stared at his monitor. The strange energy pulses from the American side had ceased as suddenly as they began. Activity stopped, Lieutenant. Whatever it was, it's done. Eva Rostova nodded, her gaze distant, looking out at the sterile buffer zone, then beyond to the vast, indifferent Atlantic. Done here. For now. But perhaps just starting somewhere else. The silent contest for global dominance continued unabated, a perpetual struggle for advantage in a world held in a precarious, dangerous balance by mutual apprehension and the sheer scale of their destructive potential. The fate of nations hinged not just on armies and economies, but on fragments of information crossing hostile borders, on the desperate courage of those who defied the darkness, and on the cold logic of detection systems manned by weary souls on the frontiers of an unforgiving world. The fragile peace endured, not out of goodwill, but out of necessity and the relentless, grinding effort required to maintain the global standoff that resulted from the terrible turning point in the 1940s. The long shadow of empires lay heavy over 2025, but even within that darkness, hidden struggles and the high-stakes game for the future persisted, their outcomes uncertain until the final act.